Kimberly Dozier is a CNN Global Affairs analyst. She joins me now from Washington. Appreciate you being with us.
And it's an interesting evening on which to join you.
Indeed. And of course, in an explosive proposal, US President Donald Trump suggested America take over Gaza and develop it into the Riviera of the Middle East, his words. He said, quote, "We will own it long term." And he even suggested potentially using US troops to forcibly remove Palestinians in Gaza and resettle them in Egypt and Jordan, two nations that have already rejected that idea, along with Saudi Arabia, Qatar and the United Arab Emirates. I want to get your response.
Well, he outlined a plan that was so outrageous, but also so vague that as I've read different headlines, whether it's Al Jazeera or the Jerusalem Post or the BBC, it's like an ink blot test, the way people have interpreted what he said. Now, the worst possible interpretation is he is saying, I do not rule out the possibility of even using U.S. troops to take over Gaza, flatten it, move the Palestinians out, and turn it into some sort of development zone, and move those Palestinians to Jordan and Egypt, even though those two countries have already articulated that they don't want any refugees. That is the best that's the most alarming way that it's being interpreted in parts of the Gulf by some of the diplomats who've reached out to me. But he could also mean it in the New York real estate way, that the U.S. would be owning the redevelopment of Gaza in which Palestinians could return. And that is also how it's being interpreted in some other quarters. And I think that's probably what Trump's national security team right now will probably be trying to pull together, because they don't want to put U.S. troops in harm's way and take on the multi-billion-dollar cost of demilitarizing and rebuilding Gaza.
Right. And of course, this meeting between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu was supposed to tackle the second phase of the ceasefire and hostage release deal agreed to by Israel and Hamas. What happens to that fragile agreement, given this brazen proposal from Trump? I mean, how will Hamas respond to this?
Well, Hamas has already said in some comments in social media that this is unhelpful. The proposal for phase two, the tension between the two men was going into this meeting that President Trump wants the fighting over so that he can get on to the rebuilding and expanding the Abraham Accords, that talks about peace between Israel and Saudi Arabia and then beyond, whereas Netanyahu, for his coalition to survive, needs to continue to fight against Hamas to remove them from Gaza, possibly before phase two. So that was the tension going into this meeting. This proposal upends that discussion and also sort of takes the heat and the pressure off Netanyahu. It will be surely seen as Trump's commitment to work with Israel to remove Hamas from Gaza at the very least. And that was the allowance for a return to fighting that Netanyahu was looking for when he came to Washington.
And as we discussed, Jordan, Egypt, Qatar, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates have all rejected President Trump's proposal to permanently relocate Palestinians from Gaza. But Trump dismissed their rejection, didn't he? Suggesting they'll eventually accept his plan. How likely is that? And what do you think he means when he says that?
Yeah, that will be perceived as downright insulting in those various capitals. I mean, Saudi Arabia was quick to put out its statement again saying, no, there will be no expansion of the Abraham Accords without a two-state solution, without Palestinian independence. And I've gotten similar muted comments from some of the other players. This is a non-starter across the Arab world, especially in the Arab street. The population in Arab and Muslim communities have been watching the horror in Gaza. They will not stomach the displacement permanently of the Palestinian population from Gaza. And those 1.8 to 2 million Gazans inside that territory right now, only some of them currently support Hamas, but if they are ordered to leave by the United States, I think you recruit every single one of them to the cause to fight not just Israel, but any U.S. troops that might dare try to enter their territory.
Kimberly Dozier, our thanks for your analysis. Appreciate it. The CIA is now the first major national security agency offering buyouts to its entire workforce. A radical step as Donald Trump looks to shrink the federal government. Every employee at the Central Intelligence Agency can get about 8 months of pay and benefits if they voluntarily quit their jobs. But sources tell CNN some areas of expertise are likely off limits and won't be eligible for the offer. Now, this comes as the Trump administration is planning widespread layoffs across a number of federal agencies, giving tens of thousands of government workers until Thursday to either accept a buyout or risk losing their jobs. One administration official says more than 20,000 federal workers have agreed to the so-called deferred resignation offer. That represents about 1% of the roughly 2 million federal employees who received the offer. The White House says it's time